Okay, rolling.
Today is,
Okay.
sorry.
All right. That's okay. Just keep going.
Pardon.
Okay.
Today is Thursday, June the 28th, 2012. My name is Billy Locke. I am interviewing Mary Agresti, and the videographer's name is Greg King. Mary, thank you for talking with us today about growing up or living in Newmarket. Can you please tell us your full name?
My name's Mary Agresti. My maiden name was Service.
Tell me about yourself. Were you born in Newmarket?
I was born at Women's College Hospital in February 1951. The famous Dr. Marion Hilliard was my doctor that delivered me. She was the head of obstetrics there and gynecology. She also was one of the first, or a player on one of the first women's hockey teams in Toronto.
And how long have you lived in Newmarket, or did you live in Newmarket?
My family moved to Newmarket in 1952 when I was 11 months old.
And what was the town like then?
You never had to lock your doors unless you were going away. Keys could be left in the ignition of the cars. Most families had only one car. Milk, bread got delivered to the house separately. Empty milk bottles were left outside with money, and if you didn't leave the money, the milkman or bread man would just catch you next week. And they sort of got to know what you ordered every week.
So where did you grow up in Newmarket?
I grew up on Elm Street, number 10 Elm Street.
And what was it like?
It later changed to 149 Elm Street. My parents paid $6,500 for their house. I had a bathtub in my bedroom until they could afford to move it into the bathroom. When I got older, they renovated and put it in there. And the Rattans, who lived next door to us, raised 6 girls in the same size, small 3-bedroom home, and with 1 bathroom. Children played hopscotch and yogi. Yogi, I don't know if you remember that game, but it was where you tied the elastics together.
Yes.
And you put your leg over
Right.
Yogi and the Kaiser, Yogi IDA, San Francisco, USA, and you jump over, and they keep raising it higher and higher. I don't think the children play that game at all anymore.
Don't think so.
No, and we played baseball, but that got to be dangerous in town because I put the ball right through the neighbor's window. And we had no TV until I was about 5, and no phone until I was about 8 years old. That wasn't uncommon either.
Wow. What is your earliest memory?
The population on Leslie Street reading 6,000 some odd people for the town of Newmarket. Shopping was all done in the main street, no plazas back then. There was Loblaws and dry goods store owned by and operated by Mr. and Mrs. Gable. Newmarket Cleaners was owned by Mrs. Georges. Bowser's Independent Grocery Store. There was Bryce's Butcher Shop. There was Perrin's Flowers. The Stedman's and Chainway Store were on the main street. They were a 5 and 10 cent store. They carried most everything from candy and makeup to clothes and hardware. The Smith family owned the hardware store, and Bud's Photography Studio was on the main street. Dawson's and Eve's Ladywear stores. Pollock Shoes, Beth's IDA store, the Rexall Drug Store, which is now Robbins Pharmacy. And it even had a soda fountain. And you could sit up and while you were waiting for your prescription, sit up and have a Coke float or a milkshake or whatever right in the pharmacy. Where the Four Seasons Chinese food takeout is now, at the top of Main Street, there used to be a Chinese-owned laundry. And they decided to get into the restaurant business. So there was a Dutch store, a German deli, there was Broadbent's Bake Shop, there were beauty salons, Yates Jewelers is now Hempen Jewelers, the Carlton Restaurant, and Roadhouse and Rose was in the same location as it is today. There was an office supply store at the corner of Botsford and Main. And the King George Hotel, which had both hotel and the bus station. That's where, if you were going north, you'd be picked up in front of Pollock Shoes, and if you're going south, you'd picked up in front of the King George Hotel. Cousin's Dairy was at the foot of Main Street.
Right.
And Glenville Dairy was on Davis Drive. Now, I remember as a child going to Glenville Dairy and they charged 5 cents for a glass of buttermilk or 10 cents for all you could drink. I can't imagine a child liking buttermilk, but I did.
Me too.
There was a Chevy car dealership, Art Close Chev Olds, I guess it was, right in where the parking lot in front of the town hall is now. That was a car dealership. For entertainment, it was Charlie Crone's Pool Hall. It later became a bowling alley. The Newmarket Arena, which in recent years has been renovated and it's a community center today, but there was only the one arena and there was only one theater in town, the Roxy Theater on Main Street. Smoking was allowed in the back rows, the green seats only, the red seats, no smoking. There was dances held every Saturday night at the town hall, commonly known as Teen Town.
Oh, sounds great. You remember a lot of places in Newmarket at that time.
Yes, I've probably forgotten a
Great,
lot
great
too.
memory. Tell me about your parents and what they were like.
My father was Tommy Service, and he was nicknamed Scotty. He was from Scotland, and he had a Scottish accent. And he worked for the town for 20 or 25 years. He retired until his retirement. He was a caretaker, or now they call it custodian, for the town hall, which incorporated the court offices, and the police station, and the jail, and also the senior social club known as the Dugout. They'd go down there and they'd play cards, the older gentlemen. I don't remember any women being involved in that, but maybe they did. He got along well with everyone, young and old. He was quite the entertainer at times, my father was. He had a huge vegetable garden, but he always gave away his vegetables and flowers. He loved socializing and always put on the tea for passers-by. He didn't know them. My mother, was not uncommon for my mom to come home and find a strange lady having tea on the back porch with him. But that's just the way he did. He loved, his garden was simply huge. It was, he did gardening for a family on Eagle Street to make some extra money too. And he was a loving father. He passed away in 1982, age 77. And my mother, Barbara Service, she cleaned houses to supplement our family income. And she did live-in babysitting for prominent families in town while the mother was in the hospital, or if they went away, if they traveled. And this allowed the extra money to allow me to go to Toronto to the orthodontist. There was only one orthodontist, and that was in Toronto, like none in the area, so I had to go there. And to get my teeth straightened. In later years, I think she earned about $25 a day for 24-hour care of the children, the meals, the laundry, the house cleaning. But she wrote down in later years all the names of her other children, and they totaled about 63. She loved those children, and they adored her. She always brought crafts and games and taught them card games and board games, and she says the dinner dishes can wait. It was important for the children to spend the time with the children, and she did them when they were in bed. She babysat for well-known Newmarket families. There was Dr. Levers, the urologist, Dr. Stevens, the pediatrician, Bob Foran, the former mayor, Dr. Owens, the dentist, Dr. Jeremy Hall was a family physician, Dr. King was in public health, Dr. Kelly, the dentist, Jim Otten, the lawyer, the Robbins pharmacist is a pharmacist. The pharmacist now. But Dr. Biggs and Bourne, family doctors. Dr. Young was the ophthalmologist in town. Dr. Hatt, the dentist. Bob Armstrong, realtor. The Reddys, the Janes, the Dixons, the Clutterbucks, the Grants. A lot of these people are still around, and their families are still around. She babysat Gail Grant as a child, which was Gail Reddy, and Gail's children, and the Arrigos, and several other families from Toronto as well. One girl, Claire, she babysat, gave the eulogy at Mum's funeral, and she had babysat 3 generations of that family.
Wow.
Yes, and her mother and her uncles and her and her sister, and then her 2 children. She quoted Barbara she quoted at the funeral as, Barbara always said that there was no such thing as a bad child, but sometimes it just took a little longer to find the good. Her favorite saying was, look upon the bright side, and if no bright side you shall find, polish up the dark.
That's good.
Yeah, she always had these little quotes. Putting it in Claire's words, She always put others first. She was honest, optimistic, funny, fair, generous, a mighty fine baker, and a natural storyteller. I really wish she could have been here doing this interview. She would have had some wonderful stories to share. She passed away in her 93rd year, but still could recite poetry in her final years, such as Robert Service's Cremation of Sam McGee. Her memory was really good for that.
So obviously there was a lot of interaction between the neighbors, and that was the next question.
Yes, and I must mention too, I had, for a sibling, I have a sister, Sheila.
yes.
She's 5 years older, who lives with us 7 months of the year. She's retired, and the rest of the time she lives in Florida with her son. Interaction with the neighbors, yes, neighbors were great. Most living in the same houses for years and years. The Allairs, the Bucklers, the Greers, Mrs. Morton, the Dunns, the Bombers, the Dixons, later on the Rattans, the Stankeviches, the Menards. The children all played together and the parents chatted, borrowed a cup of sugar or an egg, and looked out for each other. Mm-hmm. Most of the families back in the 50s, 60s were single income families. Some mothers worked or had part-time jobs, but many in the neighborhood stayed home. If they needed daycare, they just got other mothers to look after the children for them. And that's about it. Neighborhood was great.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like it was very stable.
It was.
People mainly stayed there and raised
People
their
did.
families.
People did. They didn't move too much at all.
So who were your best friends?
My best friends growing up. In my younger years were Ann Gibson, the fire chief's daughter, Annala Stankevich, Donna Goring, Susan Manners, Shelley Fevro, Mary Jane Bosworth, Pat Rattan, Holly Jackson, who she's still in, I think she's still in the area. She married Brian Pick, who is now a local pharmacist. Yeah, so I had a lot of children. Lot more too, but that's just some that are sticking out in my mind.
That's great. School. So did you enjoy going to school?
I love school. They were probably one of the best times of my life, my school days. After getting by the first day of kindergarten, I ran out crying, and my mother had to bring me back, and this cute little girl named Donna Goring, she befriended me and looked after me, and I was all right from that day on.
So where did you go to elementary school and high school?
I attended King George School from kindergarten to grade 5, and Stuart Scott from grade 6 to 8. And my first date was in grade 3. Johnny Molyneux, who became the fire chief in Newmarket, walked to my house, and he had his little fedora hat on, knocking on the door, and he was taking me to the Roxy Theater for an afternoon matinee. And then the next date was watching the Santa Claus Parade from his uncle, who was Doc Noble, that had an office above the office supply place at Botsford in Maine. And we watched the Santa Claus Parade in his uncle's office, and we made little plaster figurines.
And how did you get to school?
I walked. It was all within walking distance. I went to Newmarket High for my high school years, and I was in the 5-year arts and science program. I wanted to go to teachers college, but when I got a serious boyfriend, I changed my mind and switched to Huron Heights for my 5th year and took a 1-year. They had a crash business course called 12S, and you could go after grade 12, which I did, or after grade 11. And it was all people from Newmarket High, students from Newmarket High that went over. So in that class was just Newmarket High students, because we didn't have the opportunity to learn any business subjects at Newmarket High. It was all that, they were all done at Huron Heights. So we had to do that 1 year to cram all the business subjects in so we could look for a job right after school.
Was Huron Heights a new school at that time?
Yes. Huron Heights was built when my sister was in grade 10, and they staggered the hours. They had some went in the morning, some went in the afternoon, because there were just too many kids coming into Newmarket that were high school age. And when I was in high school, no girls wore pants. It was all skirts and dresses. They had, and the mini skirts did come in when I was in high school as well. But we had an ugly gym outfit. It was like one piece, kind of bloomers, kind of short, but bloomers, and it was the ugliest. Navy blue. It was terrible. The Newmarket High cafeteria was known for a great apple crisp. It had the hot butterscotch sauce on, and anyone that went to Newmarket High will remember those days if they were back in that era. I never skipped school. I was too afraid of the consequences, which were probably just upsetting my parents and being grounded. And, just the fact it was embarrassing to be sent to the office for skipping school or having some punishment from the school. The first Newmarket High reunion lasted a full weekend.
Wow.
I'm not sure when it was held. I think it was 1981. It was fantastic. I cried a lot when that weekend was over. I had a great social life in high school, and all those memories just came flooding back. I didn't want the weekend to end. My dad drove me to Huron Heights when I went to Huron Heights. I walked to Newmarket High back and forth, but when I went to Huron Heights, my father drove me, and then one of my friends, either I walked home or one of my friends drove us home. And near the end of the last year, my boyfriend lent me his new 68 Camaro Super Sport, and funny, I never drove my dad's car ever at home. Not till after I got married did I ever get behind the wheel of his car, but I drove my boyfriend's.
Did you have a license?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
that I did.
So did you participate in school sports or clubs?
In grade 9, I was on the student council, and I was on the volleyball team, and I remember one away volleyball game we played, there was a blackout. I don't know if it was in Stouffville or Uxbridge we went to, somewhere out that way, and there was a blackout. Everything in the gym went black, and that was quite the night that was.
So do you have any other stories to tell us about your school years?
Well, there was one Catholic school, St. John's. I believe there were about 5 public schools. There was J.L.R. Bell, there was King George, Stuart Scott, Alexander Muir, Prince Charles. That's the ones I'm thinking off the top of my head. And the school I went to, both the Stuart Scott and King George, were 2-story, and they had this big slide from the outside of the building. It was all covered metal slide that you had to go down for a fire escape from the second floor. And I used to get myself worked up in such a state, I guess I was claustrophobic, but didn't realize it back then, and that the doctor had to eventually write me a note and to say that I didn't have to go down unless there was a real fire, and if there was, one of the other students was to go down with me. My fear was that it would get jammed up, that you go down and then everybody would get stuck inside, and that's what my biggest fear was. And let me see what else. Oh yes, and I remember there were separate playgrounds for the boys and the girls. Mm-hmm. You had the girls on the one side, the boys, and the door going in, separate doors going in. And one day my friend Shelley Fevro and I decided after school we were going over to her aunt's who lived across the road to play. Well, we left the school and toddled on down the stairs and across the road, and Miss Barnes, the old spinster principal, she's hammering on that window, and we're thinking, what do we do? We're in trouble. What do we do? And she's telling us to come back. We had left the school at recess. It wasn't even the end of the day. It was at recess. But so it was okay, but we didn't get in too much trouble over that, but we thought we were. And let me see what else to tell. I don't know what happened, but is there no Elmer the safety elephant in town anymore going to the schools?
Haven't seen one.
We used to have Elmer the safety elephant, but he must have passed on because now the children, I don't know, not just children though. I see adults too riding their bikes on the wrong side of the road, walking on the wrong side of the road, not, jaywalking, doing all this, like Elmer the safety elephant.
Yeah.
Drum that into our heads.
That's
We couldn't
right.
do those things.
Sure did. Every year.
Yes.
Okay, so, and were there some extra curricular activities that you took part in?
I
What can you
did.
tell us about that?
But I'm going to talk about the, first of all, teachers that inspired me.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Good idea.
There was Miss Denny, while I think of it. Wow, her teaching methods were quite unorthodox compared to today's standards. She frightened us into learning. She threatened to have kids expelled. She'd shake them. She'd dig her fingers into their heads, and shook some of them and sent them to the office, and she constantly picked on certain ones. Poor Charlene Brand and Rolly Hodgkins and Paul Bingham. I'm surprised they didn't have a nervous breakdown, but anyway, she spent 15 minutes on a lesson and the other 15 minutes yelling and calling one of the students, "You stupid, stupid child," she'd say. I don't know how she got away with it, but she taught, I think, way past her retirement. But I was on her good side. I was her pet, I guess. She'd pull me aside and tell me not to hang around with certain people. And I think she was probably the best teacher I had, because or at least I learned the most from her, because you were scared. You were just petrified into learning. Another teacher was Mr. Frank Hollingsworth, which the arena is named after Mr. Hollingsworth, and he loved and contributed to sports so much. He loved the sports-minded kids. Girls he tolerated in the class, but adored the sports-minded boys.
Right.
I remember one hot day in July, he had gone out of the room for a second, and I had Mike McGuire at a desk beside me, and Mike was teasing me, so I took my ruler and just went like that and knocked all his books onto the floor just as Mr. Hollingsworth came in the door.
Of course.
Yes, so he was not impressed, so he made me write 1,000 lines. I must not misbehave in class, or I must behave in class, that's what it was. I must behave in class 1,000 times. And it was a hot June night. Everyone was going to the pool after school, and I had to stay home in my unair-conditioned house writing these lines. I think I got about 464, and my mom finally pulled the plug and said, that's enough. And she wrote a letter to him saying that was enough. That was punishment enough, having to stay home from the pool that night. And Mrs. Hay was my grade 1 teacher. I can probably name all the teachers in my elementary years, but Mrs. Hay, my grade 1 teacher, and Mrs. McKenna, my teacher at Huron Heights, one of my teachers, they were probably my favorites. And when I think back, they were kind, they were caring, they were willing to listen. They were very, very good. They really made an impression on me. Now, you were asking me about the extracurricular activities.
That's right, yeah.
As a child, a lot of friends went to dancing lessons at the Betty Gordon School of Dancing, or they went to figure skating. My family couldn't afford that, but I felt I didn't miss out, because they couldn't afford it, but they allowed me to go to the different church groups. Right. Because it was only 25 cents. I went to juniors at the Anglican Church. I learned to sew and knit. I went to CYC at the Free Methodist Church, where we did crafts and Bible study. And I went to Pioneer Girls at the Grace Church, and we had movies, we had games, all, with a religious overtone. But that was fine. My mother didn't feel that would do me any harm by going to another church. We had vacation Bible school I went to at the Salvation Army. And what else? I remember, back in those days, everyone made their own Halloween costumes. There was always first,
Right.
second, third prize at the school. I don't believe they do that at all anymore. But they were all homemade. They weren't store-bought. And I won a first every year. Not that my mom was great at sewing or anything, but she was just very creative. She was very crafty.
Right.
And Humpty Dumpty was the most memorable. When she dressed my sister up, she got the empty ice cream cartons from the pool hall. She got my dad to bring those home, and she covered them with unbleached cotton from the Gables dry goods store, and made faces on them, and had us wear a little blazer and shorts. And it was really quite good. I'm sure if I dug deep enough, I'd find a picture of that one. And what else? I remembered at Haskett Park one year, they had a dog show, and my mother made an old lady's costume for our little Trixie. And she actually got the best dressed dog, so that was kind of good. Or most original, that's what it was. Not the best dressed, it was most original. Mom not being the very good sewer, I can remember when she helped me with a project I had for high school in home ec. I had to make a blouse, and I didn't have time to finish it, so she gave me a little hand with that. And I barely got a pass. We laughed a lot about that after. Oh. Anyway, during my younger years, I went skating Saturday afternoons sometime, and as a teen, I would go Saturday nights, and we'd skate to the same music every night. There was mostly music from the 50s. Some songs keep playing in my mind. A White Sports Code and in 1814 Took a Little Trip. That one, oh my goodness. Doug Duncan was there. He worked there as long as I can remember. The street behind the arena is now Doug Duncan Drive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and on Sundays nothing was open, only variety stores. You went to church and you could stop at the variety store for a popsicle, but that was about it. And the restaurants. I go to the Carlton restaurant sometime. It was on the main street. There's a Chinese food restaurant. It's right down at the main part of the main street, and between Botsford and Timothy. And I'd order a Donut Delight, and it was a honey dip donut with a scoop of ice cream and butterscotch or chocolate sauce on the top, and they called it the Donut Delight. Or we'd have a Coke float. Anyway, it was fun.
Sounds like there was lots to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And where did you hang out?
Friends, I think friends, let me see. I had a dear friend I don't know where, I'm trying to think where we left off here. Friends at my time in life, I had a dear friend from high school that I remain close to, Ann Jenkin, who is now Ann Broughton. She's been a figure skating coach with the Newmarket Club for over 40 years. We talked every few days and try to get together every couple of weeks. We spent a month traveling for our 50th birthday. We went to Singapore, Malaysia, and Australia. And hanging out, I did, I must be lost here because I can't find the hanging out.
You have some memories of what you used to do?
Yes, that was the skating and going to we go to the show and that sort of thing.
That's right. I think we've covered lots.
Yeah, I keep talking and I get kind of
that's
mess you up.
That's okay. Did you have any part-time jobs during those years?
I did. The Newmarket Plaza on Davis Drive was built, I'm not sure exactly when. That was our first plaza in Newmarket. And it had anchor stores, it had the IGA, and it had the Dominion. It had Walker's store that was mostly clothing for men, women, and children. And it had the Newmarket drugstore. It had the laundromats. It had a couple of men's clothing stores. It had two shoe stores. And I got a job at the Woolworths on the lunch counter.
Right.
And I love that. There was also, I don't know if I mentioned, a Zeller's and a Diana's hair salon. I worked under the supervision at Woolworths of Daphne Harkness, and I'd be run off my feet all day. They hired me, actually, I went to apply for the job when I was 15 years old, and I got the job, and I worked the first weekend, and after that weekend I got fired because the Mrs. Melnichuk, Alva Melnichuk, that hired me, she had a daughter, Karen, my age, and she wasn't allowed to work because she wasn't 16.
Right.
But I felt a little white lie was okay because I felt I could do the work equally or every bit as good as the 16-year-old. But that wasn't the case. The problem was, back in those days, workman's compensation did not cover you for anybody under 16.
Right.
So I got fired, but that was in the fall, but by the time I hadn't barely turned 16 in February, and they called me back to go back, so I must have made an impression that
You
first
must have been
day,
pretty good.
I guess. Anyway, and then that was about, that's where I worked, and then I left Woolworths, I believe if you want to probably know how much I made, I think it was 90 cents an hour.
Wow. Better than babysitting.
Yes, I guess so. 50 cents an hour or something back then,
That's
I think.
Right.
But I probably got $1.10 by the time I finished at the end of high school.
Okay.
I left Woolworths during the summer. When school got out, then I went back in the fall because we were fortunate to have the use of a cottage. It was at Roach's Point, which wasn't very far away, but my parents got the cottage for free because my dad had trained the horses before he was married. He trained the Kilgore family horses, And my mother worked for the Kilgores, and then as we got older, we did too. But all we had to pay for was the hydro. And it was, this is with the family that my mother babysat 3 generations
Oh,
of them.
right.
Yes, and it's where my parents met.
Mm-hmm.
And my sister and I also daycared the 2 grandchildren. But the cottage had no running water. We pumped from the old well
Yes.
for drinking water, and it never passed the test at the start of the season, so we dumped the gallon of Javix down, and then we'd catch the rainwater. We had like 3 rainwater barrels, and we'd use that for washing dishes and washing our hair and bathing in. And we had the old outhouse. My mother would dig a hole in the back. We call it the back 50. The cottage was all by itself. There were fields all around us and bush down the road, and it was really quite a nice setting, but didn't have the conveniences. But I remember the one time the outhouse, well, she'd bury the garbage pail. She'd empty the outhouse, change it a few times a week, depending if we had company or not, and bury it in the backyard, back 50. But anyway, we were, I'm trying to think, there was one thing. Oh, one time there was a bat, and I had run out to use the washroom. It was night. Usually I took a flashlight, but I was in a hurry, and I ran out and under the cedar hedge into the outhouse, and the bat came out at the same time as me, swooped under. So the poor thing, it wasn't its fault, and we collided, and I freaked out. Of course, I was in my teens, and I stuck my whole head in the rainwater barrel and spat and spluttered. Oh, anyway, but also I did work at a lodge, and I cleaned and helped prep in the kitchen, and I waited on tables at Roach's Point. So I did have summer jobs there besides babysitting and doing that. And one year I did house cleaning for a lady. So I always worked, whether it be when I was going to school or in the summer. And I'll never forget the time my mother was in the kitchen making applesauce, and she was using the pressure cooker. And you don't use applesauce in the pressure cooker because the indicator stuck with the thick applesauce, and she went to take the lid off. She thought it was finished, took the lid off. She thought the steam had gotten down in it, but no, it exploded on all. She got covered in burns and all over the ceiling, and even I was sitting on the back porch playing it, even went out the open window and burnt me on the shoulder. But
wow,
back then you didn't go to the doctor.
Yeah.
No, not unless you really had to, because you had to pay for everything. And being at Roach's Point at the time, it was a little difficult. Mom didn't drive either, so she just didn't go. She covered herself in Vaseline probably, and that's about it. So needless to say, I never ever used a pressure cooker in my adult life. Never.
I can understand that.
The doctor made house calls back in those years. If you were too sick to go to the office. I had anemia. And living in town, old Doc Schofield, he'd come and he'd lay down across my bed and ask me how I was, put his hand under his head and talk to me. He'd give me a needle, and he'd give me this awful brown chocolate mint medicine to take. And to this day, I don't like chocolate mint. And I had to go to a specialist in Toronto. He sent me, and more money, my poor parents, but I got better. He took me off all fats and dairy and all fried foods and everything, and I got better. No cakes, none of that, and I got better. And so I guess diet has, works wonders. And we got free inoculations at school. Everybody got their shots at school, and didn't have to pay for it. But we had no fluoride treatments in the school.
Right.
And no fluoride in the toothpaste, and we went through, my age group went through those cavity-prone years where you had cavities in every tooth, I think. And unfortunately, my sister and I had no freezing because that cost extra, and my mom couldn't afford it.
Wow.
So I'd usually break out in a cold sore from stress and worry over having a filling filled without freezing.
Wow. So, tell me about your family. When did you meet your spouse?
Okay, the boyfriend that lent me a 68 Camaro was the man I married.
That boyfriend.
Yes. Our friends set us up as a blind date. Boy, was I blind. I'm just kidding. I always say that. I'm just kidding. He's been a good man. I was 16 and he was 20. My girlfriend, Denise Charbonneau, she went to school with me, and she was dating Orlando Irachi. And it's his brother that owned Peter's Hair Salon in town. And my husband worked as a shampoo boy in the salon. I guess he figured every Italian should try their hand at hairdressing. I don't know what he thought, but anyway, he decided to work there, and they set us up on this blind date. And we were going to the teen dance, which he ran in Bradford, and he thought if he didn't like me, he could at least say he was busy, like he had to do this and he had to do that for the dance. So, but it all worked out well. And
So when and where did you marry?
well, there's one little other thing I want to share about the time he got into hairdressing. Well, when he was at school at Bruno's, he worked there part-time at Peter's, but when he was at school at Bruno's Hair School, he started taking out this elderly lady's perm rods, and with the perm rods came the hair. And he didn't know what to do. So he went to his supervisor and told her that there was a problem. He walked out that door and never went back to hairdressing. Yes. So anyway, we became engaged 2 years, I guess, let me see, 2 years later. I was about 18. I think it was in my last year of high school, just at the end of the year, we became engaged. And married,
When did you marry?
yes, we married in 71 at St. John's Chrysostom Church in Ontario Street. We
The
had,
Catholic Church?
pardon me?
The Catholic.
Yes, the Catholic Church, and we had our reception at the one and only Legion Hall, where everyone seemed to, because there was no other halls at that time, so everybody had their reception at the Legion. And there was just not much choice of venues back then.
And how many children and did you have, and do you have any grandchildren?
Yes, we had our first baby, a daughter named Jillian in 1974, and a son Anthony in 76, and another son Travis in 1980. Our daughter lives in Newmarket with her husband and her 10-year-old son, and our next born lives in Bradford with his wife and 4-year-old son, and we're expecting our third grandchild in I guess it's November of this year.
Great.
And the other son lives in in Toronto, downtown Toronto. He owns a nightclub. And my daughter's a nurse by profession, but by education, but by profession she's works in medical device sales. And she's she's worked in both pharmaceuticals and medical device. But my other son, my middle one, is involved with the family business and with my husband, and that is we own a vegetable packing plant in Holland Landing and farm. And he's been doing that since he was 18 years old, but we've had the farm for about 4 years.
So the move from hairdressing was a good one.
Yes, it was a very good one. I can't see him having the patience for that, so anyway.
And what have you learned about raising children?
Oh, patience. At least I tried. And they've got to have boundaries. You've got to, know, they've got to know just how far they can go, and you've got to be involved with their lives, like make sure you know what they're doing and who they're hanging around with. I found that we became friends with their friends. We allowed them to come to the house. We allowed them to stay. There's many times as they got older that all these kids I had overnight all the time and all the extra cooking, but it was worthwhile. You got to know just who they were hanging around with, and it was a good thing. It was a good thing. And I know that my husband was the one that would worry, and he'd always get upset if I just went to bed if they weren't home yet. They had a curfew when they got in their teens, and if they weren't home, say by 1 o'clock or whatever curfew we had imposed, he'd start to fret and worry, and I'd just go to bed because I figured, why should two of us be up worrying when he used to get so angry with me for that. But I thought, why worry both of us? Like, if he's looking after all the worrying, let him do it. He'd go out and he'd drive around in the car looking, and he couldn't find them. I said, what's the point in doing that? But anyway, they all turned out good, and they hung around. My daughter was a little challenging for those early teens, and my sons, they usually were right up front where they were and what they were doing. And they've all turned out great kids, so
That's
I'm
great.
thankful.
Very good. Who was your favorite relative when you were growing up?
Oh, that had to be my Auntie Willa up in Roach's Point. Oh, she was a spinster. Her and her sister lived together. My dad boarded with them when he was training the horses way back before he got married. And he used to deliver their calves when their cows went, were going to have a calf. He would deliver them for them. And because he had, I guess, delivered horses too, and he sort of knew. He wasn't a veterinarian, but he was trained.
Now, how did he learn that?
Well, when he was born in Scotland, he left Scotland at 16. There were like 13 kids in the family, and he had to get out and work. So he got a job on a ranch in Argentina, and that's where he learned all about horses and how to look after them, care for them, and train them. And yes,
Yeah, and
yes.
that really came in handy for him later.
It did. It did. And having no children of their own, my Auntie Willa, I say my Auntie Willa, it was Auntie Willa and Auntie Dorothy, the Kelly girls, but Auntie Willa was very different from Auntie Dorothy. Like, Auntie Willa was very loving, and I could do no wrong, and she'd hold me up to the cupboard and say, okay, now Mary, which glass would you like? And would you like this one? I'd say no. Would you like this one? No. Would you like this one? No. My mother would say, oh, for heaven's sakes, Willa, just give her any one. My mother would have no patience with that. But they'd prop me up with chicken feather pillows, and I wheezed and wheezed, and I had asthma, I guess, but it was allergic asthma brought on probably by their cat, and then they propped me up with the chicken feather pillows, and there was one night that, it was funny. It was, I woke up it wasn't funny at the time. I was scared to death. I woke up in the middle of the night, and here's my Auntie Willa standing on the stairs yelling, pretending she had a gun, get out or I'll shoot, get out you, I'll shoot. And I didn't realize what was going on, but there was a man that lived in the neighborhood that he had a disability. And I guess he wandered at night, and he had these long johns on, and Auntie Willa didn't realize it was him, or she would have spoken to him and told him to go home. But he climbed through a window open that much with the straight pins, a dish of straight pins sitting on and he climbed through and into the house. Wow. And I guess he didn't know what he was doing there either, and but he left. But that's
scary.
Yeah, it was at the time, but it was funny after to see my Aunt Willa with a pretend gun saying, get out, I'll shoot. Bang, 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 she says.
In hindsight.
I know. And then we had a clubhouse, my friends and I. That was a big thing back then because we didn't have the video games. We didn't have all these electronics and things to keep us busy. So we had to create our own fun, and we had a clubhouse, and we had members, and we had a prayer for our clubhouse and different things we had to do. And it was fun. And Auntie Will and Auntie Dorothy let us have it on their back porch, which was all closed in. They used it when I think they rented that part out to people, fishermen and different things. But anyway, they had this old Model A car, and I used to drive around with them. It was original, and they drove around. I was so embarrassed as I got older. I was afraid, somebody might see, one of my friends or a boy might see me driving this old thing, and I ducked down. Oh boy, would I love to have that today.
I know.
And they ended up trading it in for a little, what was it? I can't imagine. It wasn't an Anglia. It was I can't even remember the name of it, but a tiny little Ford car that they had back in 1960. And they traded that in, and they had to pay for the darn car. They should have got it for free. It was
Was it a Comet?
No, a Ford Consul. It was called a Ford Consul. I don't know. Anyway, that's what it was. But anyway, it was hilarious.
Okay. Tell me about your first full-time job.
I went to work for during school week. The schools, you had to go in and get experience by going to places, and I got allowed to go to office specialty, so I worked in the billing department. I think Judy Vandergraaf, she was my supervisor, and I worked there. And then at the end of the year, I got offered a job by office specialty. I had applied there, and I had applied to the co-op. My girlfriend Ann got the job at the co-op, but I got called to office specialty for part-time job. It was not a part-time job. It was full-time, but for temporary for 6 weeks. While one girl had to be off for 6 weeks. And it was in the personnel department, which is now human resources. And it was under Jack Pearson, and I worked there for my 6 weeks. And Marion, the girl that left, came back and gave her resignation. So guess what? I landed the full-time job as personnel secretary. And then the department was there, and then it moved to, that was with the wood shop, when the wood shop office specialty had ran from Water Street over to Timothy, and then the wood shop was on the north side where the condos are now. The police station sits in the spot where office specialty was, and the seniors building on Timothy. But so when I moved up to Holland Landing when the wood shop moved. Our personnel department moved there too, and it was a good job. I got a lot of good experience at that place.
Yeah, good.
Can I hold for a second? So we're running low on juice.
So you didn't ask me how long I was there, or where I went after that. You didn't ask me where I went after that.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
I'm doing so much talking. I'm losing you for where the
You know what,
dickens I
that's
am.
okay. It's fine. It
I
doesn't have
kinda
to be
just-
exact.
No.
Yeah, yeah.